Okay, for this video we're going to look at how to call a API on the internet, and just for the purposes of the demonstration we're going to connect to a API service which will return a live price of Forex. In this case we're just going to look at the price of Bitcoin, return that back and obviously speak that back to the caller. So create a new flow, and then we've defined our inbound number there. So once that's done, the next step we need to do is to actually be able to call out to the API endpoint. So if we click on the light bulb, you'll see this is where we've got the developer features. So the first one there is a HTTP request. So if I click on that, this is where we can now go out to any third-party service. So for this demonstration, I'm actually going to use a provider called 12 Data. So they provide a number of financial instrument data, and what we're going to do is call the endpoint, pass in the BTC, which is the symbol for Bitcoin, and then that's going to return us a price. It's worth noting, if you've never done this before, it's not that difficult. Most providers that provide APIs normally have extensive documentation. A lot of them as well will have code examples. What you're looking for really is what's called a curl example, that's CURL. The reason for that is that it makes it easier to test. So once you've got your API key, if you can do a curl, you can just do it from a command prompt, if you know what that is. And then obviously it's a good way of testing it. But it's also worth noting that Workflow Studio allows you to test calls to APIs as well. So you don't have to keep ringing the number, you can actually do it in the Workflow Designer, which is something that we'll look at in a second. So what do I mean by a curl statement? So I've got one pre-prepared here. So this is just a command prompt that you just type CMD and it will take you there. If I'm just going to paste in what I've got. So as you can see, I've just pasted in that statement. So it's gone off, called the API, says give me the price of Bitcoin against US dollar. And it's come back with a return and said the symbol is BTC USD, and it's given us what the actual current price is, 114,384.09. So what we can do now is we can go to our flow. What we're interested in is this. Our first point is this kind of URL here. So I'm just going to get that. So that's our URL that we're going to use. And this is a API that you can't just use without registering, and typically most API providers will require you to do this, and then what they'll do is they'll give you a key, and you need to use that key then when you actually call the API. So what we can do is we can add that data here. So we need two things basically. We need to add something called xRapid API host, and then we need to give that a value, that, and then we also need to add an actual key. Then the provider will give you this information. They'll tell you what you actually need to pass to the API endpoint in order for it to work. So we need our key and get the value for that. I'm going to copy that in like so. So that's all the setup we've got there, and what we can do now is we can just simply click on test, and we get a useful output here which says the status code is 200, and it's been successful. And if we scroll down, we should see somewhere the data that we're interested in. So here we go, the body. So it's just confirming back the symbol to us, BTC USD, and there we go, it's showing us the rate. So we know that we've put all the details in there correctly. So the next thing we then need to do is we're going to use variables. So we want to store the actual Bitcoin price in a variable so that we can then repeat that back to our user. So what we need to do is go to variables, and we're going to add a variable. I'm just going to call it BTC price. For the type of variable, we're going to say string. So if we just click OK there and there. So what we can do now is we can go to the variable section, and then what I'm going to do is I want to add a setting, and I want to get store in the BTC price variable. What I want to do is I want to store the value that's come back from this HTTP request. So that's typically HTTP, it's the name of it, which is request 1 body dot rate, I think it was, and we put it in double braces because we want the value that's inside of that, not otherwise it will just actually store that literal value. A couple of things here, it's always worth checking. If I click on here and then go to advanced, I need to make sure that I've got that this is called HTTP request 1 and it is case sensitive. Okay, so if we go back to here, we need to make sure that matches, which it does now. And the request body, and the other thing is, was it rate? Well, we can check that by simply going back to here, go to test, and if we look in here, unfortunately I'll zoom in, but I can't make this text any bigger. If I go to body, we've got body, and it is rate, but it's with a lowercase r. Okay, so as I say, case sensitivity, it is important. And we're going to store that in BTC price. Just for now, let's create a very simple greeting around that says what it is. So we're just going to do text to speech and say current Bitcoin price is BTC price. Again, we're using the double curly brackets there, and let's just leave that as default there and click OK. So what we can do is we can just save that now and we can test it.
Current Bitcoin price is 114,392.3.
So that is just a very quick demonstration of calling an API, and as I mentioned at the start, you can use it to call any APIs, and even if you have a technical resource or you have the ability yourself, you can create your own APIs. If you put those in the cloud, then obviously you can use Workflow Studio to call those APIs. And in this example, you saw that we can get the data that comes back in the body of the HTTP response. You can get any data there, and obviously then store that against variables and use it later on in the flow. So some of the more complex examples that we've done, we actually have calls to multiple APIs within one flow, so there's no limit there, which is why it's important obviously to store data in variables as you go along. So that's calling an API.